Hey guys, tonight, we slip quietly through the cobbled streets of a sleeping medieval town, your boots clicking softly in the chill night air. The sky is a smear of indigo, the moon hidden behind a blanket of drifting cloud, and every breath you take curls like pale smoke in front of your lips. In the distance, a warm, golden flicker dances between the slats of wooden shutters. That's your destination. The Tavern. A place where the air will smell like roasted meat, damp wool, and spilt ale. A place where voices will rumble, low mugs will clink, and a burst of laughter might roll out into the cold like a stray dog looking for a home. You're about to step into the belly of medieval nightlife, and you probably won't survive this if you're expecting it to be clean, polite, or free of fleas. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what's your local time? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach the tavern's heavy oak door, the wood swollen with centuries of spilled ale and damp weather. The hinges groan as you push it inward, and the first thing that hits you is the warmth. It's the kind of heat that clings thick with the steam from boiling stews, the damp of wet cloaks drying by the fire, and the fug of breath from too many bodies crowded close. Your ears adjust to the sudden wall of sound, the uneven chorus of conversation in overlapping dialects, a lute plinking somewhere in the corner, the sudden rise of voices as two men argue over dice. The floor beneath your boots is uneven, the rushes underfoot stale and damp hiding. Who knows what old bones from a chicken leg, splinters of broken pottery, maybe even the occasional rat. You're instantly aware of how your own clothes smell sharper here, like they've soaked in the night air. In here, everything is saturated. The smell of yeast, the tang of smoke from the central hearth, the sweet and sour scent of cider warming in wooden jugs. A barmaid sweeps past you, her skirt brushing your leg, a tray balanced on one hip, and a practiced smile ready for every leering comment. Her hair's tied back in a scarf, wisps damp against her forehead from the heat. She's been here since before sunset, and she'll be here until the last drunken straggler collapses into the gutter. Behind her, the tavern keeper polishes a tankard with a rag that's seen better days. His eyes flick over you, measuring if you're here to spend coin or start trouble. He's not unfriendly, just shrewd. In a place like this, coin is welcome, trouble is not. You edge toward a bench by the wall, its surface shiny with use, and squeeze between two locals. One nods at you, his face lit with the flush of ale and good company. The other ignores you entirely, staring at the fire, as if it's telling him secrets only he can hear. The bench is hard, the wood worn smooth by years of elbows leaning in mugs, thudding down, and heads slumping in drunken sleep. From the hearth, a cauldron bubbles gently. Inside the stew is more practical than delicious root vegetables, barley scraps of meat from who knows what. Animal seasoned with salt, if you're lucky. Bread dense and slightly sour will be sliced thick and served alongside. This is no feast, but in a world where meals can be uncertain, it's hot and filling. You notice the hierarchy without even thinking. The merchants and well-off traders occupy the tables nearest the fire, where the light is bright and the warmth strong. They laugh loudest, drink deepest, their purses heavy with coin from the day's sales. Closer to the door sit the laborers still in their work clothes, the mud on their boots drying into cracked maps. They drink slower, guarding each mug like it might be their last for the week. The serving girls weave between them, all collecting empty cups, dodging grasping hands, and never quite stopping for anyone unless there's coin in sight. It's a performance, a delicate balance of flirtation, brisk efficiency, and a spine of iron that keeps the place from dissolving into chaos. Somewhere near the back, a man with a battered hat strums that lute you heard earlier. His voice is thin but steady, telling tales of distant wars and lost loves. Every now and then someone tosses him a coin, though just as often it's a chunk of bread or the last gulp of ale from a mug. Entertainment here is paid for in whatever's at hand. The air is alive with motion. A dog noses its way under the tables hoping for scraps. A boy too young to be drinking, but old enough to work hurries past, carrying a stack of firewood to the hearth. Two men shake hands over a deal struck in murmured conversation, while another spits into the rushes, punctuating a joke that sends his friends into hoarse laughter. And you, quiet, watchful, are soaking it in. This is no staged reenactment or romanticized painting. This is the medieval tavern in all its sweat-slick, smoky, chaotic truth. You'll taste the grit in your teeth before the night is over. But you're not leaving yet. The night is young, the ale is flowing, and every shadow in the rafters promises another story waiting to be overheard. You let your eyes wander upward, tracing the thick beams that crisscross the low ceiling. They're blackened with years, no centuries of smoke layered, until the very wood seems made of shadow. From some hang herbs tied in bundles, rosemary, sage, perhaps a sprig of juniper. They aren't for decoration. In a place like this, every scrap has a purpose. Herbs dry above the fire so they can be crushed into stews or steeped into bitter medicinal teas. A rack of pewter mugs gleams faintly in the firelight, each one slightly dented from years of being slammed onto tables. The corner near the door is the coldest, and that's where the strangers sit. Travelers who arrive too late to find a bed at the inn, or who prefer the cheap shelter of the tavern's benches. Their cloaks are heavy with road dust boots, stiff with dried mud from miles of walking. They speak little, preferring to nurse their drinks and watch the door for anyone who might recognize them. You wonder how many are truly passing through, and how many are hiding from someone or something. Behind you, a burst of voices rises sudden and sharp. A dice game has gone wrong. One man swears loudly, pounding the table with a fist the size of a ham, while the other leans back his chair, teetering on two legs, smirking with the confidence of someone who knows he's won. The tavern keeper doesn't even look up from polishing a mug. He's seen worse. And besides, there's a quiet sort of justice here. Debts are settled in coin if possible, in fists if not. You learn quickly not to draw attention unless you can back it up. You turn back toward the hearth. The lute player is trying to lift the mood, with a bawdy tune now, one that draws a few knowing chuckles from the older patrons. A woman near the fire hums along as she ladles stew into wooden bowls. She moves with the rhythm of someone who has done this every night for years, her hands steady, even as children dart between her skirts, chasing one another in circles. The smell of the stew has thickened rich with the fattier cuts of meat that have broken down into soft threads. Someone tears a loaf of bread in half steam curling out from the crust. You're offered a bowl, thick, rough pottery that warms your hands instantly. The first sip is earthy tasting of barley and onion, with the occasional pop of peppercorn heat. It's not refined, but it fills you from the inside out, each mouthful a small anchor against the creeping cold outside. On the far wall, a man in a faded red cloak is quietly carving something into the table with a small knife. The light catches the movement of his hand, slow and deliberate. When you glance closer, you see initials, crude symbols, and dates etched into the wood all over little ghosts of past visitors who wanted to leave proof they'd been here. This table is a graveyard of fleeting presences, each one worn softer by years of elbows and spilled drink. The tavern is starting to shift in tone. Early evening politeness gives way to louder voices, freer laughter. Ale loosens tongues and stories begin to swell with each retelling. A fisherman boasts of a pike so large it nearly pulled him into the river. A mason swears he's seen the king's own retinue pass through the next town over. Even if half of it is lies, nobody minds. A good lie told well is worth more than dull truth in a place like this. One of the serving girls sets a small clay jug down on your table. The cider inside is cloudy and faintly sweet with a yeasty edge that reminds you it's fresh from the barrel. You sip it slowly, letting the taste spread across your tongue. The warmth in your chest isn't just from the drink, it's from the sense that you're part of the room now. People glance at you less suspiciously, nodding and greeting rather than staring outright. From somewhere behind the counter, the tavern keeper produces a strange-looking vessel, a squat pewter tankard with a lid that snaps shut. He fills it to the brim before sliding it down the bar to a man with a face like weathered leather. You realize it's a traveler's mug meant to keep the drink from sloshing out as he carries it away. The man drains it without a pause, snaps it shut again, and disappears into the cold night without a word. No one finds it unusual. In a world where streets after dark can turn dangerous fast. Sometimes it's wiser to drink on the move than linger too long. As the door swings open and closed, the night air snakes in, carrying with it the faint scent of wet stone and horse sweat from the stables nearby. You catch sight of a figure outside, tall cloaked, watching the tavern for a moment before slipping inside. The firelight catches the glint of metal at his belt. He orders without removing his hood coin, sliding across the counter in a quick, quiet exchange. There's a ripple of attention from the locals, but no one challenges him. In here, curiosity is a luxury few indulge in. The dog that had been scrounging earlier curls up at your feet, now its fur patchy ribs faintly visible beneath. It gives a soft sigh as it settles, sensing that you're not likely to kick it away. For a moment, there's a strange comfort in that the shared understanding between strangers seeking shelter from the cold. Somewhere near the back, the boy who brought the firewood is now sweeping the rushes into a neater scatter. He works quickly, eyes down, careful not to disturb the games or knock into passing trays. You can tell this place runs on a kind of invisible order. Everyone has their place, their rhythm, their role in keeping the tavern's fragile peace. And you're still just an observer. But the night has only begun to show its face. Soon the true heart of the tavern will come alive in ways that no quiet supper could reveal. You'll see it in the shadowed corners, hear it in the unguarded laughter, and smell it in the stronger drink yet to be poured. The first sign that the night is shifting comes not from the regulars, but from the door. It bangs open hard enough to rattle the hinges, and in tumble 3 men laughing so loud, the lute player pauses mid-chord. Their cheeks are raw from the cold hair, damp with melted frost, and their boots stomp mud onto the rushes with every step. They're already deep into their cups, their words slurring into each other, and their presence is like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of attention spread through the room. One of them heads straight to the hearth, shoving aside a stool, to claim the warmth, while another makes a great show of pulling a heavy purse from his belt. The coins jingle loud enough for half the tavern to hear, and he tosses them onto the counter as if to announce, "We'll drink until it's gone." The tavern keeper doesn't flinch. He knows the type loud now broke by dawn. Still, a heavy purse is a heavy purse. The barmaid arrives with a jug so large you're not sure it could be lifted one-handed if it were full. The men pour their own mugs, froth spilling over onto the table, and launch into a sea shanty that they seem to know only half the words to. Others join in banging their cups on the wood to keep rhythm until the whole room is vibrating with sound. It's a strange, infectious joy, the kind that makes you forget for a moment about the damp air, the sticky floor, or the fact that you're drinking from a mug that's probably never seen boiling water. You glance toward the corner where the travelers had been sitting earlier. One is gone. The other sits with his hood still up, staring into his drink. He's unmoved by the noise, almost as if it passes right through him. There's a stillness about him that feels deliberate, and you find yourself wondering whether he's measuring the crowd for danger or simply waiting for someone who hasn't arrived yet. The heat in the room has risen, fed by the crush of bodies and the fire's steady roar. Smoke clings low in the rafters, blurring the edges of the candlelight. Shadows sway across the walls, cast by the restless flicker of the flames. You catch sight of the carving man again, his knife now tucked away, his eyes half closed, as if he's drifting somewhere between listening and remembering. The stew pot is finally lifted from the fire, set on a wooden trivet to cool. Its surface shimmers with a thin layer of fat, and the smell makes your stomach remind you just how long it's been since you last ate. More bowls are passed out, but the drink is now flowing faster than the food. Tankards are refilled before they're emptied, and the barmaid moves with a kind of practiced ballet balancing trays above the heads of men who barely notice her passing. In the middle of the room, a small crowd gathers around the dice game again. The earlier tension has turned into outright competition, each roll of the dice punctuated by cheers or groans. You edge close enough to see the coins stacked in neat little piles at the center. Copper for the cautious, silver for the bold. A man with a scar running from his ear to his jaw scoops up a pile of winnings, his grin wide enough to show a missing tooth. He winks at you as if to say, "That's how it's done," before turning back to the table for another throw. A new voice joins the lute player, a woman with a voice like honey, low and warm. She's not young, but her presence is magnetic. She leans against the wall as she sings, eyes half-lidded, lips curved in a smile that suggests she knows exactly the effect she's having. The song isn't bawdy, but it carries the weight of longing, and for a few moments the dice game quiets, the boasting softens, and the whole tavern leans in to listen. When the song ends, the applause is loud and sincere, though quickly drowned by the return of laughter and clinking mugs. The woman collects a few coins, a hunk of bread, and a splash of ale from grateful patrons, then retreats to a seat near the fire. She tucks her feet under her skirt and watches the room with sharp, knowing eyes. You notice now that the tavern has developed invisible borders. The merchants still guard their warm seats, though their conversation has loosened into easy laughter. The laborers lean back in their chairs, mugs dangling from fingers, content to watch the louder patrons burn through their coin. The travelers keep to the edges, while the performers drift between worlds, part of the tavern, but never anchored to one group. Near your bench, the patched fur dog has been replaced by a lean cat, its eyes like two polished coins in the dim light. It weaves between legs with calculated grace, tail flicking, when a hand reaches down to pet it. It pauses beside you, sniffs your hand, then decides you're uninteresting and moves on. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnies, the sound muffled by the thick walls. The door opens briefly, and a gust of cold air sweeps through, carrying with it the damp, earthy smell of the street. It's enough to make you shiver even here in the heat. The door closes again, and the tavern folds back into itself, the outside world once more shut away. The men who came in singing are now deep in a drinking contest with two locals. Cups are drained in single gulps, slammed down on the table to shouts of approval. A small pile of coins grows beside the mugs, wagers on who will outlast the other. The tavern keeper watches from behind the bar, expression unreadable. He knows this could end in laughter or in blood, and he'll be ready for either. You take another slow sip of cider, letting it rest on your tongue before swallowing. The heat from the fire, the weight of the drink, and the swirl of sound around you create a strange, drowsy haze. But you know better than to let your guard drop entirely. In a medieval tavern, the night can turn on a single careless word, and you'd rather not be the reason it does. For now, though, you're safe. You're warm, and the heart of the tavern is still beating strong. The change begins subtly, the way a shadow lengthens without you noticing. The loudest voices soften conversations, draw closer to the ear, and laughter takes on a different timbre, quieter, but edged with something more knowing. The air feels thicker now, the fire's heat wrapping around you like a heavy cloak. You realize the crowd has shifted again. Those with early mornings have left trading the comfort of the tavern for their beds, and the ones who remain are here for more than just ale. At the dice table, the scar-faced man from earlier is now joined by a fellow whose fine cloak doesn't match his weathered hands. They play with an intensity that makes you wonder if the stakes are more than coin. A few silver pieces glint in the candlelight, but their eyes keep darting to each other's faces, as though every throw is a silent wager on something unspoken. The hooded traveler is still in his corner, but now he's speaking softly to the barmaid. You can't hear the words, but the way she leans, in one hand resting on the table, the other curled protectively around the handle of her tray, suggests this is not idle chatter. When she straightens, she slips something small into her apron pocket, before moving away without a glance back. The traveler doesn't move either, but you sense a current between them, some exchange that will matter later. A pair of men at the far end of the bar trade what looks like a folded scrap of parchment between them. It vanishes into one man's boot in a practiced motion, and they turn their backs to the room, as if their talk is nothing more than weather and market prices. You suspect otherwise. The lute player has switched to a slower, more intricate tune, now fingers moving deftly over the strings, coaxing out something that feels less like entertainment and more like a distraction. People pay less attention to him, which might be the point. Music can cover many things in a room like this: the scrape of a chair leg, the whisper of a secret, even the faint clink of coin being counted beneath a table. Your cider has gone lukewarm, but you sip it anyway, letting the cloudy sweetness coat your mouth. The noise has settled into a low murmur, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. It's easy to imagine that every table here holds its own little world deals, being struck grudges, quietly fed alliances born in the glow of shared drink. The tavern keeper emerges from behind the bar to check on a few tables himself. His presence changes the air. People straighten a little, eyes follow him, and conversations shift as he passes. You see now that he's not just here to pour drinks and collect coin. He's a kind of silent warden, the one who keeps this place from boiling over. A nod from him can mean safety. His disapproval might mean finding yourself on the wrong side of the door, or worse. In the shadowed space between the bar and the back wall, a small doorway stands half-hidden behind a hanging cloth. You hadn't noticed it before, but now you catch the movement of someone slipping through the fabric, falling closed behind them. It's not marked, and no one pays it obvious attention, but you can't shake the feeling it leads somewhere more private. Perhaps rooms for rent. Perhaps meetings that prefer not to be witnessed. A serving girl sets down a new pitcher of ale at your table, her eyes flicking toward the corner where the hooded man still sits. She says nothing, just moves on, but the glance carries weight. You've been in the room long enough now to start reading the unspoken language who's aligned with whom which glances are warnings, which smiles mean nothing at all. The scar-faced man loses a round of dice and laughs, though it doesn't reach his eyes. He leans in close to his opponent, speaking low enough that you can't catch the words, but the set of his jaw tells you this is more than a friendly game now. The fine cloaked man responds with a grin that feels like a challenge. A few onlookers draw closer, sensing that the night might be about to turn interesting. In the corner near the hearth, the singing woman is in conversation with a pair of men whose cloaks still carry the faint smell of horses. They speak in murmurs, but the woman's gestures are animated, her hand resting briefly on one man's forearm as she makes a point. You can't tell if she's negotiating for her next song, her next meal, or something altogether different. The dog has returned, trotting confidently between the tables, as if he owns them all. He stops by the dice game, sits heavily on his haunches, and watches the players as though he understands the stakes. Someone tosses him a bone, stripped nearly bare. He takes it and vanishes under a bench, the gnawing sound blending into the tavern's low hum. Another gust of cold air slips in when the door opens, but this time it's not a customer. A boy no older than 10 darts inside, whispers something into the tavern keeper's ear, and then slips out again as quickly as he arrived. The tavern keeper's face tightens, but he says nothing, just disappears back behind the bar, his hands busy with a stack of mugs that suddenly seem to need urgent attention. The night feels like it's leaning towards something, not a fight exactly, but a shift. The crowd is smaller now, more concentrated. The warmth is thicker, the air sharper, with the mingled scents of sweat smoke and the faint metallic tang of coin. You're aware suddenly that you've become part of the tavern's memory for this night. Tomorrow, your presence will be another shadow on the wall, another unremarked detail in 100 overlapping stories. For now, though, you stay still, listening, letting the weight of the place settle over you. Somewhere behind the hanging cloth, a door closes softly. Somewhere else, a low chuckle turns into a whisper, and the fire, steady and patient, keeps burning its light, stretching into every corner, even the ones meant to stay dark. It starts with a sound so small you almost miss it, a mug tipping over. The liquid spreads across the table in a slow amber sheet before dripping onto the rushes below. But it's the reaction, not the spill itself, that makes you pay attention. The man who knocked it over stands too quickly, his stool skittering back and toppling with a wooden crack. His face is flushed, not with drink, but with something sharper. His opponent at the dice table, the fine cloaked man, remains seated, one hand still on the dice as though they might hold the answer to how this will end. The space between them feels like a drawn bowstring. Conversations nearby fade to murmurs. Even the lute player lets a note hang too long before moving on. The tavern keeper is already in motion, sliding between tables with the fluidity of someone who's done this dance many times before. His hand lands on the angry man's shoulder, and for a moment it seems like the tension will break into a scuffle. But instead, the man jerks away, mutters something low, and stalks toward the door. It bangs shut behind him, letting in a final gust of cold air, before sealing the tavern once again in its close, smoky warmth. The fine-cloaked man smirks, gathers the coins on the table, and pockets them without so much as a glance around. If there's triumph in his eyes, it's hidden under a kind of weary familiarity. You get the sense this isn't his first win tonight, nor will it be his last. The quiet resumes, but it's the brittle kind, the one where everyone pretends nothing happened, while keeping one ear tuned for trouble. The hooded traveler takes a long drink, drains his mug, and sets it down with careful precision. Then, without looking toward the barmaid, he taps the rim twice with a knuckle. A moment later, she appears with another full mug. No words, no coin exchanged in view. The carved table man has produced a small pouch from his belt and is carefully shaking something into his palm, small glinting pieces that catch the firelight. He turns them over with his thumb lost in thought before tucking them away again. A merchant at a nearby table notices but says nothing. In a place like this, curiosity is often the quickest road to regret. You notice the door behind the hanging cloth stir again. This time, two figures emerge, a stocky man with a bald head and a woman with hair like a river of dark silk. They move quickly toward a table near the wall, their eyes sweeping the room before they sit. The woman's gaze is sharp, and it catches on you for the briefest of moments before moving on. The dog has abandoned his bone and is now circling the hearth, drawn by the scent of something new being placed on the spit, a joint of meat, its fat beginning to hiss and pop. The smell sends a warm wave through the tavern, stirring hunger even in those who've already eaten. Someone near the bar calls out for bread to go with it, and the barmaid answers without breaking stride. In the farthest corner, almost hidden in shadow, a man with narrow eyes begins dealing cards onto the table. The cards are thick, their painted faces worn at the edges. Two other men join him, each sliding coins forward as an unspoken entry fee. You've seen dice games tonight, but this feels different. There's a stillness here, a concentration that pulls at the air. The narrow-eyed man deals slowly, deliberately, and each player studies their hand as though the outcome might shape the rest of their night or their life. The singing woman has taken up her place again, though this time her voice is softer, more intimate. She sings in a language you don't understand, but the melody is low and winding, wrapping itself through the room like smoke. Even the card players glance up once or twice before returning to their game. Your cider is nearly gone, but you hold on to the mug, tracing the worn rim with your finger. The heat from the fire has worked deep into your bones, and there's a strange comfort in the rhythm of the tavern, the ebb and flow of noise, the unhurried shuffle of people finding their place in the night. You know, though, that this calm is only a layer. Beneath it, the tavern is a web of connections, debts, and unspoken understandings that you can only half read. The hooded traveler finally rises his movement, drawing subtle attention from several corners of the room. He doesn't go to the door, though. Instead, he disappears behind the hanging cloth. The fabric sways for a heartbeat before falling still again. The tavern keeper glances that way, but makes no move to follow. The joint of meat on the spit is nearly ready now. The smell is mouth-watering, rich and heavy, mingling with the scent of ale and smoke. The dog sits closest to it, gaze fixed as if sheer willpower might earn him a scrap. Laughter rises again in pockets smaller, more contained than earlier, but genuine enough. Outside, the wind shifts. You can hear it pressing against the walls, rattling the shutters in their frames. Somewhere down the street, a voice calls out the sound, muffled and quickly lost. In here, though, the world has shrunk to the size of the tavern, its edges defined by firelight and the occasional creak of timber underfoot. You know the night still holds more. Cards will be played, songs sung, quiet deals struck in corners no one will admit to noticing. And you're just close enough to see it all without being drawn in. For now. The tavern has settled into its midnight shape. Those who remain are not simply drinking to pass the time, they are here with purpose. The air is heavier now, the kind of warmth that seeps into your clothes and clings to your skin long after you leave. Every sound feels closer, more intimate, as though the room itself has leaned in to listen. The hanging cloth stirs again. From behind it emerges the hooded traveler, the same one who had been a silent shadow for most of the night. His hood is pushed back now, revealing hair threaded with silver and eyes that glance over the room with a practiced swiftness. He walks to the bar without a word, places something small into the tavern keeper's palm, and waits. The tavern keeper slips away, disappearing behind the counter as though into another world. At the card table, the narrow-eyed dealer has begun another hand. His fingers are deft, the cards moving like water between his hands. One player's face is a mask of focus. The other chews his lip until it's nearly bloodied. The coins in the center grow slowly, the clink of metal sounding louder in the hush than it should. When one man folds, pushing his cards forward, the dealer's eyes lift not to the table but to the room, as if checking to see who might be watching. Near the fire, the joint of meat is finely carved. Thick slices, juices spilling onto the wooden platter are passed around. Bread follows dense, dark, and steaming from the oven. The smell is irresistible, and for a moment, even the card players glance toward the hearth. You accept a slice, the warmth soaking into your fingers. The first bite is smoky rich, threaded with herbs that cut through the heaviness. You taste rosemary, maybe thyme, their sharpness carried by the rendered fat. The bald man and the silk-haired woman at their table are speaking in low voices, their heads bent so close they might be sharing secrets through breath alone. Occasionally, one will glance toward the door, as though expecting it to open any moment. When a new jug of ale arrives, the woman pours with the grace of someone long used to watching her hands steady, precise, never spilling a drop. The lute player has taken a break, leaning his instrument against the wall and nursing his own drink. Without his music, the tavern's other sounds sharpen the shuffle of boots on the rushes, the soft murmur of dice rolling in some far corner, the creak of a bench as someone shifts their weight. From the kitchen door, a boy appears carrying a tray stacked with mugs. His steps are quick, purposeful, but he still finds a moment to sneak a piece of bread from a passing platter. The tavern keeper catches the theft out of the corner of his eye, but says nothing. In this place, hunger has its own rules. You notice movement near the hearth, two men trading seats without speaking, one sliding into the warmth, the other taking his drink and heading toward the back. The exchange is wordless, but practiced as though they've done it many times before. The man who leaves disappears behind the hanging cloth. The fabric falls closed, but not before you glimpse the faintest flicker of lamplight beyond. The carved table man is at work again, his knife glinting in the firelight. This time, his carving is deliberate, long, careful lines that shape into something more than a name or date. It looks like a crest, perhaps, or a sigil. He works slowly, ignoring everything around him, as though this one act might outlast the noise and heat of the night. The singing woman has returned, but she doesn't sing. Instead, she sits in the corner, her gaze fixed on the silk-haired woman across the room. Every so often, her eyes narrow just slightly, and she takes a measured sip from her mug. You wonder if they know each other or if there's an unspoken rivalry at play. A sudden burst of laughter draws your attention to the bar, where a group of men have gathered around the hooded traveler. His hood is back up now, but you catch the glint of his teeth as he smiles at something one of them says. The tavern keeper returns from behind the counter, placing a small, cloth-wrapped bundle in front of the traveler. No coin changes hands this time, and the bundle disappears into the folds of his cloak before anyone can get a better look. The wind outside howls harder, pressing against the shutters until they groan. For a moment, the fire bends toward the chimney, drawing sparks upward. The room tightens again, not with fear, but with the awareness that the night is deepening. In a medieval town, the late hours belong to those willing to navigate its shadows. One of the card players wins a hand. The narrow-eyed dealer doesn't flinch, just gathers the cards again with a flick that feels final. The loser pushes back his bench, mutters something about bad luck, and leaves the table. He doesn't leave the tavern, though just moves to a corner cup in hand and watches. Watching you realize is almost as much a currency here as coin. You finish the last of your bread, wiping the crumbs from your fingers. The heaviness of the meal settles into you, mixing with the warmth of drink, but your senses stay sharp. The tavern at this hour is less a place to relax and more a place to witness, to learn its quiet rules before they're tested. From behind the hanging cloth, a muffled voice calls out a sharp syllable you can't quite catch. Heads turn, but quickly turn back. The sound is nothing unusual here, you gather. Nothing unusual for them, at least. And so the night goes on, unfolding in slow, deliberate beats. The deals, the games, the glances, each one a thread in the tavern's deep-woven tapestry. You are here, caught in it now, though no one has yet pulled on your thread. The hour has stretched thin like candle wax pooling at the base of a wick. The tavern hums in a lower key, now a place running not on merriment, but on momentum. The patrons who remain are locked into their own orbits, card games, whispered bargains, the slow dance of glances between people who know each other far better than they admit. The wind outside batters the shutters hard enough to rattle them in their frames. A log shifts in the hearth with a crack, sending a rush of sparks spiraling upward. For a moment, the light flares, throwing the rafters into sharp relief beams, blackened by centuries of smoke, hung with herbs that sway gently in the draft. The flicker catches on the carved table man's knife. His work is nearly finished now, a small stylized crest of interlocking shapes. You wonder if it marks loyalty, ownership, or warning. At the bar, the hooded traveler is gone. Not slipped out the front, you would have noticed the cold rush of air, but gone nonetheless. You glance toward the hanging cloth, but it's still no sign of recent movement. Whatever business he had here, it's finished, and he's vanished into the building's deeper shadows. The silk-haired woman rises from her table. Her companion stays seated, watching her with an unreadable expression as she crosses the room. She moves like someone who expects people to get out of her way, and they do. She disappears behind the cloth without looking around, leaving a faint trace of perfume behind something floral out of place among the tavern's stew-thick air. The singing woman leans back in her chair, eyes following the other's departure. There's a tension in her posture now, as if she's weighing whether to follow or stay put. She opts for the latter instead, flagging down the barmaid for another mug. At the card table, the dealer shuffles slowly, drawing the moment out. The two remaining players keep their eyes fixed on him. Coins clink softly as more are added to the pot. It's no longer just about winning. It's about proving something, holding ground until the other yields. The meat on the spit is gone now, reduced to bones picked clean and stacked on a platter near the fire. The dog gnaws the largest one under a bench tail, thudding occasionally against the floor. The rushes around him are littered with crumbs and stray bits of fat. By the far wall, the bald man who'd been with the silk-haired woman leans back in his seat, eyes half closed. He's not asleep. His stillness feels deliberate. Every so often he lifts his mug, takes a measured sip, and lets his gaze sweep the room in a way that feels less casual than it looks. The carved table man wipes his knife on his sleeve and tucks it away. He runs a calloused hand over his work, then stands stretching as though waking from a long dream. Without a word, he leaves the table and heads toward the fire, finding a new perch where the heat can reach his hands. His old seat is quickly taken by one of the dice game regulars, who doesn't even glance at the fresh carving. The tavern keeper moves among the tables again, collecting empties, exchanging quiet words. When he reaches the card table, he rests a hand briefly on the dealer's shoulder. It's a touch that carries weight, less of a greeting, more of a reminder. The dealer nods once, just enough to be seen, and continues his work. From outside, a sudden crash echoes wood on stone, maybe a cart tipping over in the wind. A few heads turn toward the door, but no one moves to investigate. The tavern is its own island now, the world beyond its walls, nothing more than a distant rumor. The singing woman finally rises. She doesn't go toward the cloth, but toward the fire, settling on a stool a few feet from the carved table man. She greets him softly, and he answers with the smallest of nods. Their conversation is low, but their eyes keep straying toward the door behind the cloth, as though both are waiting for something or someone to reappear. Your drink is nearly gone again. You toy with the idea of ordering more, but you're aware that your senses are already softened by the warmth, the food, and the haze of ale in the air. Still, the cider's sweetness calls to you, and before long you're signaling the barmaid. She arrives with a fresh mug, placing it in front of you, with a faint smile that says she's noted your endurance. As the hour turns deeper still, the tavern begins to feel less like a public house and more like a private club where entry isn't marked by coin but by endurance. Those who remain know each other's rhythms, speak in shorthand, and can read a glance from across the room. You are an outsider here, but for now you're tolerated. You're quiet, you're watchful, and in a place like this that counts for something. Behind the cloth, the faint creak of a hinge carries into the room. Someone has opened a door in the hidden space beyond. You can't see who, but you can feel the shift it brings, a tightening, a subtle straightening of backs. Whatever happens next will belong to the few still awake to witness it. The door behind the hanging cloth opens wider now, and two figures step through. The first is the silk-haired woman. Her expression unreadable, her eyes scanning the room with the calm assurance of someone who knows exactly how much attention she commands. The second is a man you haven't seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark cloak slick with the sheen of melting frost. He carries himself with a soldier's ease, though there's no insignia on his clothes to name him. Conversations falter just slightly as they cross the room. Not silence, never silence, but the kind of pause where voices drop half a note enough to listen without seeming to. The silk-haired woman glides toward her table, resuming her seat beside the bald man. The newcomer takes the chair opposite her, the two exchanging a brief clasp of hands over the table. No words are audible, but the exchange feels like the closing of a circle. The bald man gestures to the tavern keeper. Without a word, a jug of something darker than ale appears on the table. It pours thick and slow, catching the firelight with a reddish glint. The scent drifts your way, sweet-spiced and far stronger than anything poured so far tonight. At the card table, the dealer pauses mid-shuffle to glance over. One of his players notices and follows his gaze, eyes narrowing as they settle on the newcomer. The dealer resumes shuffling, but the rhythm has changed slower now, as though his thoughts are elsewhere. The singing woman has turned slightly in her chair, her posture casual, but her focus fixed on the same table. She lifts her mug and takes a long drink without looking away. The carved table man beside her notices following her gaze with a flicker of interest. The soldier-like newcomer leans forward, speaking low to the silk-haired woman and the bald man. Their heads incline toward each other, shoulders forming a tight, private huddle. You can't hear the words, but the weight of them presses through the air, measured, deliberate. The kind of talk meant to bind agreements or seal intentions. The tavern keeper drifts near, but doesn't interrupt. His presence is a silent boundary, a reminder that this is still his domain. The silk-haired woman meets his eyes for a heartbeat, and something unspoken passes between them. He moves on, but slower now, like a man who's marking the edges of a situation. Near the fire, the dog has abandoned his bone in favor of sniffing around the newcomer's boots. The man ignores him at first, then reaches down to scratch behind his ears in an absent-minded way, never breaking the flow of his low conversation. The dog settles at his feet, as though claiming him. The bald man refills all 3 mugs his pour steady despite the uneven surface of the table. The liquid catches the flicker of the flames again, deep red and viscous. They drink together, each sip slow, as if measuring time by the pace of the shared cup. At the card table, the dealer loses a hand deliberately. Anyone watching closely could see it. His opponent gathers the coins, grinning, but the dealer doesn't seem to care. He stands, murmurs something to the remaining player, and walks away, his eyes never leaving the silk-haired woman's table. The singing woman leans toward the carved table man, now whispering something that makes his jaw tighten. He glances toward the silk-haired woman, then back at her, as if weighing whether to get involved. Whatever he decides, he stays seated for now. From outside, a faint clatter carries in the uneven clop of hooves on cobblestone, slow and deliberate. The wind has eased, but the air pressing against the tavern walls feels denser, as though the night is holding its breath. The soldier-like man reaches into his cloak and produces a small leather pouch. He slides it across the table to the silk-haired woman. She doesn't open it, just rests her hand on it lightly, then covers it with the bald man's hand as well. The gesture is small, but it closes the moment like a lock clicking into place. The tavern hasn't gone quiet, but it's tuned itself differently now. Every laugh is softer, every shuffle of boots slower, every mug set down more carefully. Those who know enough to notice are pretending they haven't. Those who don't are only aware that something has shifted. The silk-haired woman says something brief to the soldier-like man. He nods, rises, and makes his way toward the door. The cold pushes in as he leaves, trailing the scent of horse and leather. The dog, faithful in his choice, follows him out without a backward glance. The door closes, and the tavern exhales. The silk-haired woman lifts her mug again, her eyes half-lidded as she drinks, while the bald man leans back in his chair, gaze sweeping the room like a man checking the lay of his land. You sip your own drink, tasting less of the cider now, and more of the room itself, thick with the smoke of old wood, the musk of damp wool, and the heavy perfume of unspoken arrangements. You're in it now, this late-night current, and the deeper it runs, the harder it will be to pretend you're just passing through. The tavern has thinned again, but those who remain are rooted deep. They are not drifting in for warmth or drink anymore. They are anchored each to their own small sphere of intention. The hearthlight seems to have settled lower, as though the fire too has grown weary of its work. Shadows stretch longer, creeping into corners that earlier felt open. The silk-haired woman and the bald man are still at their table. The pouch remains under her hand untouched, as if the weight of it alone is enough to seal its contents. She speaks softly now, her voice carrying no further than the bald man's ear. His face barely moves in response, but you notice the slow, steady rhythm of his thumb against the mug tap, pause, like the measured beat of a clock running down. Across the room, the carved table man rises at last. He moves with a casual air, but his eyes keep drifting toward the pair. He pauses briefly at the bar, exchanging a few words with the tavern keeper. The keeper's only response is a tilt of the head toward the fire and the faintest narrowing of his eyes. Whatever was said, it was meant for the two of them alone. The singing woman drifts away from her corner, now taking her mug with her. She does not head for the silk-haired woman's table, though you can tell every step is an act of resistance. Instead, she moves toward the card table where the lone player from earlier sits nursing his drink. She sits beside him, crossing her legs with the ease of someone accustomed to being watched. The tavern's soundscape has changed again. Earlier in the night, it was all overlapping noise dice, clattering mugs, slamming songs, tumbling into laughter. Now it's layers of quieter noises, the scrape of a chair leg, the muffled cough of a man by the door, the slow clink of coins being turned over and over in someone's palm. The space between sounds feels deliberate, as though every silence is a pause for thought. From outside comes the faintest echo, a rhythmic metallic clatter like chain links shifting. It fades quickly, swallowed by the walls. No one else seems to notice, or at least no one reacts. The silk-haired woman finally moves the pouch. She slides it into the folds of her cloak, with a smoothness that suggests she's done this many times before. Then she rises her chair, scraping lightly against the floor. The bald man stands with her. Together they make for the cloth-covered doorway. The carved table man's gaze tracks them, but he doesn't follow. The singing woman, however, leans subtly in her seat, her eyes narrowing to slits. They disappear behind the cloth. It stirs once, twice, and falls still. The bald man's absence from the room is a quiet subtraction, like a candle being snuffed without ceremony. Near the bar, the tavern keeper refills a jug from a barrel low enough that he has to stoop. He glances toward the cloth-covered doorway once, then moves on to check the mugs at the tables still occupied. His steps are unhurried, but you can see the way his eyes map the room, never lingering too long on one point, but touching everything. The carved table man takes a place by the fire again, staring into it as though waiting for it to tell him what happens next. His knife is still sheathed, but his hands rest near it without thought. At the card table, the singing woman starts a conversation with the lone player. Her voice is light, but her posture is angled toward the cloth-covered doorway. She laughs at something he says, though her eyes remain fixed elsewhere. The tavern has entered the part of the night when time becomes slippery. You're no longer sure if you've been here hours or only moments. The cider in your mug is warm now, but you sip it anyway, letting the sweetness carry a faint trace of sharpness down your throat. The door opens just a crack, letting in a whisper of cold that raises the hairs on your arms. No one comes in, no one goes out. It closes again as softly as it opened. Behind the cloth, there's a sound, a muffled thud heavy enough to travel through the floor. It lasts only a moment, then is gone. The conversations in the tavern continue as though nothing happened, but you can feel the subtle ripple it sends through the air. A few heads lift, then drop again. The carved table man exhales slowly, his gaze steady on the fire. The singing woman takes a longer sip from her mug, her eyes sharp and unblinking. The tavern keeper polishes a mug with slow, deliberate turns of his wrist, his attention fixed nowhere and everywhere at once. The night is nearing its hinge point, the moment when it could either ebb quietly toward morning or break open into something none of its patrons will forget. You realize you're leaning forward slightly, as if you too are waiting for whatever will come through that cloth next. The cloth finally stirs, not with the quiet, deliberate push of someone slipping through unnoticed, but with a sudden, purposeful sweep. The silk-haired woman emerges first, her face still composed, but her eyes sharper than before, polished steel rather than silk. The bald man follows close behind his jaw, set his gaze scanning the tavern like a man taking stock of a battlefield. Every subtle conversation in the room seems to stall for half a heartbeat. It's not silence, just a shared pause, a collective intake of air. The silk-haired woman doesn't go back to her old table. Instead, she walks straight toward the bar, the bald man matching her step for step. She sets a single coin on the counter, the kind that glints differently from copper or silver, heavier in its presence than its size should allow. The tavern keeper studies it, then looks up at her. Whatever passes between their eyes is invisible to everyone else but heavy enough to leave a mark in the air. He takes the coin without a word, slips it into his apron pocket, and turns away to draw them a jug of the strong red drink. At the fire, the carved table man's gaze locks on them. He doesn't move, but his grip on his knee tightens, fingertips pale in the flicker of the flames. Beside the hearth, the singing woman shifts her weight, crossing one leg over the other, with an ease that belies the sharpness of her eyes. The bald man takes the jug from the tavern keeper and pours into 3 mugs, 2 for himself, and the woman, one left untouched at the far edge of the bar. No one moves to claim it. It's as if it's waiting for someone specific who hasn't yet arrived. From outside, the sound of hooves again, closer, now steady in their rhythm, cutting through the wind's quieter sigh. The silk-haired woman glances toward the door, then down at her drink. She raises it, but doesn't sip, holding it in both hands, as though anchoring herself. The door opens with a low groan, and the cold slips in like a thin blade. A man enters, tall, wrapped in a heavy cloak, his face hidden deep in its hood. He pauses in the doorway long enough for the tavern to feel the weight of his arrival. The bald man gestures subtly toward the empty mug on the bar, and the stranger crosses to it without removing his hood. The carved table man exhales through his nose, slow and measured. The singing woman leans toward him, murmuring something too low to catch. His reply is little more than a grunt, but it carries a note of understanding. The stranger takes up the waiting mug, lifts it slightly in silent acknowledgement, and drinks. When he lowers it, his hood slips back just far enough for you to catch the faint glint of a scar along his cheekbone. His eyes flick briefly to the silk-haired woman, then to the bald man, before returning to his drink. The tavern's heat feels thicker now, less from the fire and more from the tension threaded through the air. Conversations resume, but they're quieter, careful not to intrude. The card player from earlier pushes back his bench and leaves the table altogether, retreating to a shadowed seat near the door, where he can watch without being watched in return. The tavern keeper moves behind the bar with the deliberate pace of a man who knows better than to hurry in moments like this. He keeps his hands busy with mugs, but his eyes track the trio at the bar, reading the rhythm of their body language like a clockmaker reading gears. Near the hearth, the dog has returned, curling into a tight ball, as though even he can sense that this is not the time for wandering. His ears twitch at the smallest shift of boots on the floor. The silk-haired woman finally drinks, her gaze steady over the rim of her mug. The bald man follows suit, then sets his cup down with a quiet but decisive thud. The stranger drains his in a single unbroken swallow, then pushes it back across the bar. Behind the cloth, the faint murmur of movement continues, a reminder that whatever business lives back there is still unfolding. The carved table man watches the doorway, his eyes narrowing just slightly each time the fabric sways. The singing woman is still beside him, her smile faint but unreadable. The trio at the bar speak in low tones, now their heads close enough that the rest of the room is shut out. Whatever they're planning, it's not meant to leave their small circle. You sense deals here aren't recorded in ink or sealed with wax. They're measured in nods, gestures, and the unspoken agreement of those present to remember exactly what suits them and nothing more. You take another sip of cider, but its sweetness is muted by the dryness in your mouth. The night has tilted into something more deliberate, each movement carrying a kind of intent that feels almost ceremonial, and you realize you're sitting in the middle of it. Not a participant, not exactly, but no longer invisible either. Your presence is being weighed in the same quiet calculations that measure every other soul still awake in this room. The stranger at the bar does not linger over his second drink. Instead, he pushes the empty mug toward the bald man and rests one elbow lightly on the counter. His hood is still drawn enough to shadow most of his face, but the shape of his mouth, set unmoving, gives away nothing. The silk-haired woman tilts her head slightly, as though listening for something beneath the tavern's layered sounds. Her eyes drift toward the cloth-covered doorway, but she doesn't rise. Instead, she slides her untouched drink to the stranger. He accepts it without a word, and this more than anything else tonight makes the carved table man sit forward in his seat. The carved table man doesn't hide his interest now. He leans one forearm on his knee, eyes narrowed, tracking every small gesture at the bar. The singing woman notices and murmurs something to him, but he doesn't look away. She frowns faintly and takes a slow drink from her own mug. Behind the bar, the tavern keeper places another small cloth-wrapped bundle like the one the hooded traveler carried earlier near the trio. The bald man rests his hand on it, fingers curling around it possessively before slipping it into his cloak. No one else in the tavern moves, but you can feel the air thicken in a way that tells you everyone's attention is sharper than it seems. The stranger drains the drink the silk-haired woman gave him. Then he rises, not in haste, but with a smooth, measured movement that suggests both readiness and control. The bald man stands as well. The silk-haired woman does not. She remains seated, her eyes lowered, tracing the rim of her mug with one fingertip. They speak briefly, the words too low to carry, but the tone is clear, a quiet agreement, final and binding. The bald man pulls back his cloak enough to reveal a short blade at his hip. He adjusts it slightly, a movement so small it might pass for a stretch, but there's no mistaking its purpose. From outside, the sound of hooves again. Slower this time, deliberate in their approach, until the rhythm halts just beyond the tavern's door. A pause. Then the faint jingle of harness buckles settling. The door does not open. Instead, the carved table man rises abruptly, his bench scraping against the floor. He crosses the room toward the fire, but it's no idle movement. He's positioning himself closer to the bar, closer to whatever is about to happen. The singing woman doesn't move, though her gaze flicks toward the door and back to the silk-haired woman. The bald man and the stranger exchange a final nod. Then they walk toward the door together. The cold rushes in as they push it open, carrying with it a trace of frost-bitten air. For the briefest moment, you catch sight of a dark shape waiting outside a horse, its breath steaming in the cold, and another figure standing beside it. They step out the door, closing behind them, with a hollow thump that feels louder than it should. The silk-haired woman remains at the bar, still seated, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She takes a single sip from her mug, then sets it down again with exquisite care. The tavern breathes around her. Dice clatter faintly in the corner. The lone card player shuffles his own deck, though he isn't dealing. The dog pads back in from somewhere unseen, shaking off the cold, and curling by the fire as if nothing unusual has passed. The tavern keeper's gaze meets the silk-haired woman's for a moment, then slides past her to the cloth-covered doorway. He moves toward it slowly, as though he's considering whether to step through. He doesn't. Instead, he returns to the bar and resumes polishing mugs with that same slow, deliberate rhythm. The carved table man takes a seat 2 places down from the woman, close enough to speak without raising his voice, but he doesn't speak yet. He studies her profile like a mom reading a map for paths only he can see. And you, still holding your drink, are aware that whatever game was being played here tonight hasn't ended. It's simply shifted somewhere just out of sight. The tavern door stays shut, but the cold outside seems to press against it harder with every heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the walls, muffled voices rise and fall low, urgent but too indistinct to make out. The silk-haired woman remains still at the bar, her fingertips resting lightly on the base of her mug, the way one might keep a hand on a tether to something just out of sight. The carved table man finally leans toward her. His words are soft, meant only for her, but his voice has an edge, a knife wrapped in cloth. She doesn't turn to look at him. She answers with a single sentence spoken flat, and he leans back slowly, as though filing away what she's just told him. The singing woman watches them both, her eyes hooded. She swirls the dregs in her mug, then drains it in one swallow. Without a word, she rises and crosses to the bar, setting her empty mug directly between the silk-haired woman and the carved table man. It's a move too deliberate to be about thirst. The tavern keeper notes the empty mug, but doesn't reach for the jug immediately. Instead, his gaze flicks toward the door, then to the cloth-covered archway at the back. The cloth stirs once, not as though someone's passing through, but as if a draft has found its way from behind it. The lone card player has abandoned his pretense of play. His deck lies idle on the table, his attention fixed on the front door. His foot taps under the table, quick and uneven, betraying an impatience he's trying to keep hidden. Then a sound. A sharp knock, not at the front door, but somewhere along the side wall of the building. It's so distinct that half the heads in the room turn toward it. The knock comes again, 2 quick raps, then silence. The carved table man's eyes sharpen. He looks to the tavern keeper, who is already moving toward the sound. But instead of investigating, the keeper takes a narrow, unlit lantern from a shelf behind the bar and sets it down in the open. He doesn't light it. He doesn't need to. Whatever that gesture means, it's understood by more than one person here. The silk-haired woman picks up her mug and finishes it in a single drink. Then she stands. She doesn't look toward the door. Instead, she moves toward the cloth-covered archway, the carved table man falling into step beside her without being invited. The singing woman lingers at the bar a moment longer, then follows. From outside comes the muted snort of a horse and the faint clink of harness metal. The air in the tavern feels heavier now, as if the fire's heat is being absorbed by the thickening quiet. The trio vanish behind the cloth. For a moment, you can still hear the rustle of their movements, then even that fades. The remaining patrons glance at each other in sidelong looks, but no one speaks of it aloud. The dog has lifted his head from his paws, ears pricked toward the side wall where the knocking came from. He doesn't growl. He just waits, tense, as though anticipating some signal the rest of you can't hear. The tavern keeper resumes his place behind the bar, his movements measured, almost ceremonial. He pours the singing woman's mug at last, though she's no longer there to take it. The mug sits alone on the counter, steam curling upward into the fire-lit air. Minutes pass, or maybe seconds. Time has gone slippery again. The knock doesn't come a third time. Instead, from outside, the faint creak of leather and wood, something shifting, weight, something adjusting position in the dark. You realize that whatever has been building tonight is no longer contained entirely inside these walls. It's out there now in the cold, wrapped in the same quiet purpose that has shaped every glance and gesture you've witnessed since the night began. And sooner or later, it's coming back in. The first breach comes not with the front door swinging wide, but with the sound of boots on the back step. It's faint at first, just a scuff against wood, but in the tavern's charged stillness, it might as well be a drumbeat. You glance toward the cloth-covered archway, just as it stirs again, not with a draft this time, but from deliberate movement. The carved table man emerges first, the silk-haired woman right behind him. Her eyes sweep the room with that same unhurried precision, but her breathing is sharper now, the faintest sign of strain. The singing woman follows last, her mouth pressed into a thin line, her gaze flicking toward the back wall, as though she's calculating distance. The tavern keeper doesn't speak, but his hands pause on the mug he's drying. The silence that falls now is different. It's not the conspiratorial hush of earlier, but the expectant quiet of people who know a moment is about to tip. From the side wall comes a single solid thump. Then the knock again, 2 quick raps exactly like before. But now the dog growls low in his throat, the sound vibrating against the rush-strewn floor. His ears are pinned forward, eyes locked on that wall, as if he can see straight through it. The bald man steps through the front door without warning, letting in a cold so sharp It bites at your skin even from across the room. His cloak is dusted with frost, and his cheeks are flushed from the wind. He closes the door behind him carefully, not with haste, but with intent, and walks straight to the silk-haired woman. They speak in low, clipped exchanges. She nods once, then reaches inside her cloak. For a heartbeat, you think she'll draw out the pouch, but instead she produces a folded scrap of parchment. This she presses into the bald man's hand. He tucks it away without reading it. The carved table man shifts his weight forward, one hand resting on the back of the nearest chair. His attention is split between the bald man and the side wall. The singing woman stands still, mug in hand, but untouched, her gaze darting between the three of them. The side wall knocks again, this time louder, sharper. It's not a request anymore. It's a summons. The tavern keeper sets the mug down with a soft thud and moves to the cloth-covered archway. He disappears behind it without a word. The carved table man glances once at the silk-haired woman, then follows him. The bald man turns toward the knocking. He doesn't move to answer it, he just waits. The dog has risen now, pacing in a tight line between the hearth and the wall, growl rising each time he turns. From outside comes the distinct creak of a door hinge. But it's not the tavern's front door, it's somewhere to the side, out of view. The knock stops. The silence it leaves behind is deeper than before, pressing against the inside of your ears. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate. More than one set. You can hear them circling toward the front. The silk-haired woman takes her seat at the bar again, but this time she sits straighter, hands flat on the counter. The singing woman drains her mug in one long pull, sets it down and steps back toward the hearth. She doesn't retreat exactly. It's more like she's giving herself space. The carved table man returns through the cloth-covered archway, his face unreadable, but his hand now rests on the hilt of his knife. The tavern keeper is just behind him, his expression as calm as it was an hour ago, though his eyes are darker, heavier. The front door rattles once under a testing hand. Not a knock. Just the handle turning a fraction, then releasing. The bald man exhales through his nose, slow and deliberate, and moves toward the door. He doesn't look back. He doesn't signal anyone. He just reaches for the latch. The moment he touches it, the dog stops growling. The fire pops in the hearth. And you realize that every person still awake in this tavern is holding their breath. The latch lifts with a clean, deliberate sound. The door opens, not with a violent shove, but with the kind of slow, careful push that feels more dangerous than a sudden entry. Cold air slides in, wrapping itself around ankles and chasing the warmth from the floor upward. Two figures stand in the threshold. The first is wrapped in a heavy, travel-stained cloak, its hood deep enough to shadow the face. The second is taller, broader, a presence that seems to fill the doorway without effort. Neither moves forward immediately. They simply stand, letting the firelight spill over them in thin streaks. The bald man steps back just far enough to give them room. His expression is unreadable, though his hand rests loosely at his side in a way that keeps his cloak edge from fully hiding the hilt beneath. The silk-haired woman does not rise from her seat at the bar, but her eyes find the newcomers and hold them. No greeting, no question, just recognition, as if they were expected all along. The tavern keeper doesn't move toward the door. He lingers behind the bar, his hands resting flat on the counter, eyes fixed on the pair in the entrance. The carved table man has taken 2 steps forward from the hearth, weight balanced lightly on the balls of his feet. The singing woman has shifted further to the side, not retreating, but positioning herself where she can see both the door and the cloth-covered archway. The taller newcomer takes the first step inside. Boots hit the rushes with a dull, deliberate thud. The cloak shifts as they move, revealing a faint gleam of metal at the hip, a dagger, perhaps, or something shorter. The hood stays down, face still hidden in shadow. The second figure follows, closing the door behind them, with a muted click that seals the cold outside. They move toward the bar slowly, neither rushing nor dawdling, eyes scanning the room in a measured sweep. The bald man murmurs something low to the silk-haired woman as they pass. Her only reply is a slight tilt of her head toward the carved table man. The stranger's gaze follows that motion for the briefest moment, then shifts back to her. The taller one stops midway between the bar and the hearth. Their hand rises just enough to push back the hood. The firelight reveals a weathered face marked by lines that could be from age or simply from a life lived under hard skies. Their eyes are pale and sharp, cutting easily across the tavern's haze. A murmur runs through the room, not loud, not fearful, but enough to say that more than a few here know who this is. The carved table man narrows his eyes. The singing woman's lips curve in something that isn't quite a smile. The silk-haired woman finally speaks. Her voice is calm, almost soft, but it carries. "You're late." The pale-eyed newcomer answers with a low chuckle, though it holds no humor. The roads are not as they were. The second cloaked figure steps forward, then drawing back their own hood. The face beneath is younger, though not young, scarred at the brow, jaw tight. Their gaze goes immediately to the bald man, and whatever passes between them needs no words. The tavern's heat feels different now, the kind that prickles the skin. Every movement is sharper, every sound. Boots on rushes, a mug settling on wood rings with more clarity. The pale-eyed one gestures toward the silk-haired woman's seat at the bar. She does not move to offer it. Instead, she gestures to the untouched mug still sitting there since earlier in the night. It's taken raised in a slow toast and drained without hesitation. The bald man shifts slightly, angling himself between the bar and the door in a way that suggests the path out is no longer free to all. The carved table man rests a hand on the back of a chair, close enough to grip it closer still, to reach for the knife at his belt if needed. And in the brief, taut pause that follows, the fire pops again, loud enough to draw every eye for a fraction of a second. The moment breaks, but only just. The real matter, whatever it is, has not yet begun. The pale-eyed newcomer sets the empty mug down on the bar with a soft but deliberate thunk. It's a signal more than a sound. The silk-haired woman meets their gaze without blinking. She doesn't rise, doesn't smile, just tips her head slightly, as if to say, "We're here now. Do it." The bald man takes a single step closer to the newcomers. He keeps his posture loose, but you can see the readiness in his shoulders. The younger, scar-browed figure shifts their stance in return, squaring to face him. It's not yet a confrontation, but the air between them is heavy enough to make your palms itch. The tavern keeper moves with a slow, practiced grace, coming around the end of the bar, as if simply checking the tables. In reality, every movement places him closer to the center of the room, between the fire and the bar, between the pale-eyed stranger and the rest of the tavern. He's not here to break whatever is about to happen. He's here to keep it contained. The carved table man steps forward until he's just inside the pale-eyed one's reach. His knife remains sheathed, but his thumb rests on the hilt, ready to ease it free if the moment turns. The singing woman has shifted again, her back now to the wall near the cloth-covered archway, her eyes watchful and bright in the firelight. For a long breath, no one speaks. The only sound is the low crackle of the fire and the faint drip of ale from an upturned mug somewhere near the dice table. Then the silk-haired woman breaks the stillness. "The road was long," she says softly, "but the matter is simple. You have what's owed, or you don't." The pale-eyed one's chuckle is deeper this time, but it carries no warmth. They reach slowly into the folds of their cloak and draw out a small leather purse. Its weight is clear from the way it lands on the bar, solid, final. The silk-haired woman's hand hovers above it for a heartbeat before she draws it toward her. She doesn't open it. She doesn't need to. Instead, she slides it behind the bar where the tavern keeper takes it without looking. The bald man exhales through his nose, an easing, but not a full release. The scar-browed one gives the smallest of nods, though their stance remains alert. The carved table man glances toward the silk-haired woman, as if to ask, "Is that it?" She doesn't answer him. From outside, the wind presses against the shutters again, carrying the faint clink of harness buckles. A horse shifts its weight, hooves knocking lightly against cobblestone. The sound is a reminder whatever brought these people together tonight, it isn't done until someone leaves. The pale-eyed one turns slightly, catching the carved table man's gaze. It's enough they say low, but clear. The carved table man's hand eases from his knife hilt. The silk-haired woman takes up her mug again, finally drinking. Her eyes close for just a moment, like someone letting go of something they've held far too long. When she sets the mug down, the smallest smile ghosts across her face. The tavern exhales in its own way. Conversations stir back to life. A dice cup rattles near the hearth. The lone card player picks up his deck again, shuffling it idly. The dog returns to his place by the fire, curling into a tight ball, as though the tension was his to bear as well. The pale-eyed newcomer and the scar-browed one step back toward the door. The bald man doesn't move to stop them this time. The door opens, letting in a sharp breath of night, then closes again with a final muffled thud. The carved table man returns to his seat near the fire. The singing woman moves to the bar, retrieving the mug the tavern keeper poured for her long ago. The silk-haired woman finishes her drink, her eyes distant, now focused somewhere far from the tavern walls. The night resumes its rhythm. The threads have loosened. Whatever was bound here this evening is now carried out into the cold, and you remain a witness to it all. Part of the tavern's story now, though. You'll never know how many more such nights it has seen or how many more it will. The tavern settles back into itself as if the walls have drawn a long breath and finally let it go. The fire burns low now, its light softer, warmer, casting gentler shadows on the beams above. The voices around you blend into a quiet hum, the kind that doesn't demand attention. Somewhere a mug is set down with a soft clink. Somewhere else a chair creaks under shifting weight. The silk-haired woman lingers at the bar, her posture loose for the first time all night. The carved table man is bent slightly toward the fire, watching the embers pulse red and gold. The singing woman hums something faint, just a tune without words, drifting through the air like a scrap of a dream. The dog shifts in his sleep pause, twitching against the rushes, as though he's chasing something only he can see. The scent of the last meal still hangs faintly in the room, smoke-roasted meat, warm bread layered with the deep, steady smell of old wood and stone. Outside, the wind has eased. The cold remains, but it no longer claws at the shutters. You can almost imagine the quiet streets stretching away from the tavern, lined with houses breathing their own soft warmth into the night. Somewhere far off, a church bell marks the hour, the sound carrying faint and clear before it fades into the stillness. Your eyes feel heavier now. The room's edges have softened, the firelight pooling into a golden haze. You let the last threads of conversation blur into a comfortable murmur. You're warm, safe here, and the night beyond the door feels distant, unimportant. So you rest, letting the slow rhythm of the tavern carry you toward dreams.